Episode 1, Where Healing Happens, Addiction, Awakening, and the Path to Wholeness. In this deeply personal and wide-ranging episode, I sit down with someone very close to my heart, my husband, Reno Harnish. Reno is a marriage and family therapist and professional clinical counselor working in a 30-day drug and alcohol detox center. But beyond this, his credentials lie in an extraordinary story of transformation, resilience, and spiritual awakening. Our conversation takes unexpected turns as we trace Reno's journey from his unique upbringing as the son of diplomats, traveling the world and navigating life as a spiritual, curious child, to the highs and devastating lows of adulthood. Reno opens up about his battle with alcoholism, the unraveling of his first marriage, and the painful collapse of a multi-million-dollar business he once led as CEO. But this is not just a story of loss. It is one of profound healing. Reno shares how hitting rock bottom became a doorway to a deeper self, catalyzing a powerful inner reckoning and leading him back to his spiritual roots. We explore the philosophies and practices that helped him rebuild from within: non-dualism, Buddhism, deep meditation, wisdom texts, and yes, even pickleball. Together, we ask, where does the true healing happen? Is it with our relationships, in presence, in pain, in stillness, or perhaps in all of the above? In this episode, it's about falling apart, finding yourself, and the mystery of becoming whole again. Well, welcome to the very first episode of Unveiled with Dr. Natalie. For my first guest, I have a really special guest, someone who's very near and dear to my heart, my favorite person on this whole wide world planet, and that is my husband. So Reno Harnish. So welcome, Reno, to this first thing. And it's so funny because, again, we talk to each other all day, every day. And the point of this podcast, so the whole reason, as I've shared with you and other people, why I wanted to start this podcast is because I feel like I want to bring more awareness to people's stories around their healing journey and around how they came out of times of challenge, obstacle, struggle when they were dealing with really big moments and opportunities for personal growth, spiritual development. And I especially wanted to talk with other healers about their journey, because I do feel like there's actually very specific topics, themes, and influences that are pretty universal to all healers, regardless of whatever their main modalities are. And I wanted to bring awareness to that so that there was just a deeper sense of inclusion. And I always say that the best healers are the ones that they themselves have been through their own dark night of the soul and have had deep transformation that they can pull from and resource from, and then use that to share with others. So
one of the first conversations that we had was like, where does the healing arise from?
Yes.
Like, where does healing come from? And
exactly.
That's sort of one of those subjects that just you can talk about forever. Yeah.
And I think we do.
We do.
Yeah. I think that we think that healing, I always think that we're on the same page, but then we have a different perspective on it.
A little bit.
And so
and
for
that's
you,
okay.
And that's great. That's great. I think we're all meant to have different perspectives. But for you, where would you at this point in your journey say that you think the healing comes from?
Well, I think the healing is a practice. The healing is ongoing. And ultimately, right now, in this very moment, this is the only moment that will ever exist. And we're all just sharing this never-ending, beautiful present moment. And this is not my idea. This is an ancient idea, and a practice that is recommended across traditions. Certainly, it's not just a Buddhist recommendation or an Advaita Vedanta or Hindu recommendation or even a mystic Christian recommendation. It's a way of perceiving experience that may actually be more true than the way that we habitually have learned to engage with experience. So where is the healing? It's in the present moment, right? And it's the never-ending present moment. And ultimately, can I relax and enjoy the ride of the present moment that's always unfolding? And what am I doing to to stop my enjoyment of the present moment.
Yeah. Unless it's not you. And I think that this is where we differ in that conversation, right? Is that sometimes I think that moments are beyond our control, right? We talk about how there's these ideas around how what we have control over is how we respond and react. And because my background is so much around working with people and my own trauma stories,
Yes.
that I've found it really difficult sometimes to that present moment awareness. It takes so much practice. It takes so much effort to, I think there was I'm going to butcher this, but I think it was like Robin Williams quote that was something about what is happening to you is not what happened to you. But I think that sometimes it's hard
Trauma isn't what happened to you. It's how it's
Right.
showing up, right?
Right.
Exactly.
Or in this very moment, in this time and place and space, what's happening to you in this particular time is not what already occurred. So not taking, I think, what has already occurred and putting that framework and filter onto present moment. And that's really, I think that's the only reason why I get a little bit about that present moment, because it is difficult, I think, depending on what's happening. And then also the people that are, I think, dealing with really, really terrible stuff in the moment. I also feel like that's also hard for them too. It's like difficult to tell someone who's going through incredible pain or loss.
And I don't absolutely right, and I don't mean to say. First of all, I want us to be trauma informed.
Yes.
Throughout this conversation.
Yes.
As much as humanly possible, and to recognize the huge privilege that I have experienced in my life. The privilege of having mental health, the privilege of having a relatively loving, beautiful set of parents and family, and being raised in the end of the 20th and the beginning of the 21st century, and having access to resources. I mean, the amount of the privilege is just astounding. But I'm also definitely not saying that there aren't tons and tons of objectively horrible, painful, awful things that are happening all the time right now, or that a person that's experiencing any of those things should be expected to do anything other than just their best to cope whatever's unfolding, right? If a bomb is falling on hospitals filled with children, the people in there should shelter and take, right? We're not, this isn't about some sort of objective perfection. I think it's the recognition that in every present moment, there's always going to be thoughts, feelings, emotions, sensations, and perceptions. And whatever is arising, like you said, I can only be responsible for my half of the equation, my side of I'm looking out through these eyes onto the world. And so can I relax and to a certain degree not be hypnotized by my own internal discursive dialogue, which may or may not be making the situation more challenging or projecting something into the situation, which may not actually be there on the basis of my experience with my family of origin or whatever adverse experiences that I've had, and into the present moment. So you're right, it's just ongoing.
So before you had, or actually I want to say it like this, how did you come to this place of where you're at now with your understanding?
It's a journey, right? There isn't, I don't think there's a destination with any particular understanding. And our friend Jeff at the Dharma Bums Temple is fond of telling the story of Buddha's number one disciple who he asks to give a speech on emptiness. And Subhuti, I think, sits there, or Sariputra maybe, I'm not sure, one of the two, sits there for an hour in silence. And then at the end of the speech, Siddhartha Gautama applauds. This is the most perfect discourse on emptiness, right? So the highest teachings are wordless, which is something that Lao Tzu would say too. But you asked, gosh, how did we get here?
Because I don't think we come to this, right? And like in this conversation already, you've already given us multiple name drops, shall we say, multiple ascended masters, teachers, different religious studies and texts even. So how did all of that come to you? How did you even get interested in all of that?
Right. And it's interesting trying to retrospectively figure out how we got to wherever we got to. I remember being a child in Roman Catholic Church with my family and singing songs, and in particular Catholic hymns, and at sometimes becoming moved deeply with emotion to the point of just over like tears welling in my eyes. And from being a participant in a faith structure, I think that looking backwards, I think of that as the beginnings of the faith journey, the seeker's journey, this journeying path. I don't think I knew it at the time why I was being overwhelmed by spirit, essentially, when I was singing Catholic hymns in church, but I was. And then I remember we were living in Rome at the time. My dad was a U.S. diplomat, you know that, and this was probably right around my time of being confirmed in the Catholic faith. And I had gone to...
When was how old were you for your confirmation?
I don't remember this, whether it was 7th or 8th grade, but right around there.
Okay.
And we had gone to Assisi. And
for where Francis was from.
Where Francis was from. And I remember being emotionally overwhelmed and really deeply connecting to Francis of Assisi, getting emotional.
I am too. Oh my God, you're going to make me cry. I know why.
I know. Just in that environment, which is why I ended up choosing him as my patron saint. But shortly after that...
Or did he choose you,
right?
I mean, like,
who knows, right?
That's how it works with all of the ascended masters, whether we are chosen or they choose us. And it's really, I think it's mutually done.
And so Francis, I remember just being so connected with him. And shortly thereafter, there was a number of homeless in Rome, and where we would skateboard. At the time, we were skateboarding kids. There was, I think, a war monument called the Foro Italico, which had very smooth marble, which made it excellent to skate.
Oh my God, can you imagine looking back as an adult now in like a historic place of like marble?
Yeah, we're taking it up.
Yeah, totally, teenagers.
But then, running into a homeless person that was just deeply decompensated, using my language today, very decompensated, and then ultimately feeling compelled to try to come back and offer him some food and some support. But I think looking backwards, so there's this early faith, which I think is a gift of my family structure, ultimately.
And did you feel like that starts with parents, with your grandparents?
I don't know where the thread of faith begins. Certainly, I think of my grandmother, who's still with us. It was a 98-year-old grandma, Kitty, and she has had a tremendous faith her whole life, and I think been a big example to the family in that way. Certainly my father and my mother. But where does it come from? I don't know. I had a felt sense of having connection with spirit and faith at that time. But as far as the healer's journey, gosh, what to include.
Going back to Rome and being witnessing.
Being moved by wanting to help this particular homeless person and feeling compelled even to this very day to want to be supportive of any of our brothers and sisters that are suffering, right? Which is the mission.
Exactly.
To understand my own suffering, but also to support my brothers and sisters in trying to help them reckon with their own suffering.
Exactly. And so just for everybody else, how do you do that for people today? So professionally, obviously, so you are a healer and via the profession.
Right, that's right. Well, I had this whole career arc. How did I get to this point? I was married when I was 26 years old to my now ex-wife, and we had a really wonderful relationship. I got to be a dad in that family. My stepdaughter Zoe, who I loved getting the opportunity to be a dad in that context and be her soccer coach and that sort of thing. My ex-wife and I founded a business together, or helped grow this business, and it was wonderful. It was stressful. It was difficult. It was incredible. It started at $0, and we ended up growing it to be this incredibly successful business along with a business partner. But all the while, my alcoholism was really intensifying. And certainly I had begun drinking like most people do as teenagers in high school with friends and smoking weed and doing dumb stuff. And actually I'll pause and above my mother and father's bed, there was always a serenity prayer. And I didn't know what the serenity prayer was. God grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, the courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. But I remember being moved, and also would always look at that prayer in some way. My grandmother Gloria My mother's mother, Gloria, went into recovery for her alcoholism at the approximately the age of early 50s. She passed away in her middle 60s from lung cancer, sadly, but she was sober for the end of her life. And so she, in a way, gave this gift of recovery to me, unwittingly, by hand stitching this serenity prayer that was posted above my mom and dad's bed. And my mom would say, well, just so it's very likely that you could be an alcoholic. I don't think she said it would be very likely, but she said there's a lot of alcoholism in our family. Just so you know, it's really possible that you could be an alcoholic. And so that's something they always warned me about. Here's our cat.
Yes, doing what cats do.
I know, doing what cats do. Maybe we move them along.
Onyx, come on. I know you're very excited. So you've had this, I like to think of it as subliminal messaging of serenity prayer being present and in your home, and having, I think it's pretty amazing that your mom was so aware of the issue and could talk about it and could demystify it and bring it out into an open, honest conversation done with like care and concern and love, because I think that that's one thing that not a lot of families do. There's so much shame around addiction and people don't talk about it and they hide it. And there's not a lot of stories of recovery. There's not a lot of stories where we can look back and say, oh, this person is a role model for me because they did get sober and they lived the rest of their life that way and they tried to, lack of a better word, atone for AA, right? They talk about like making amends for what was, for anything that they might have done that might have hurt somebody.
Yes.
And so anyway, this idea that was, the Serenity Prayer was there, that this is something that, which I also think is really beautiful because it has a lot to do with like sobriety or overcoming these really difficult, challenging, hard things in our life, is done not alone, right? God grant me serenity. God grant me the wisdom. God grant me strength.
Right. And that recovery can be a family value.
Yes.
Ultimately, and I love saying this to the men and women that I get to speak with now, working as a therapist in addiction recovery, is that recovery can be a family value, and they can pass it on to their children, and that's a very beautiful and hopeful thing, and grandchildren, and that anyone can recover in a family is very hopeful. It's an incredibly hopeful thing, so that it's a gift that's given. But so. I didn't know what this serenity prayer really meant, but I engaged with alcohol and then I ended up becoming an alcoholic. And a part of whether it's my physiological inheritance, my spiritual inheritance, my mental, emotional inheritance, my social inheritance, who knows the mystery of the why of compulsivity related to addiction. But I did become an alcoholic, and I was functioning. I'll throw that in air quotes because what does that even mean? Alcoholic. But weekend warrior, Thursday through Sunday, every week to the point of deep and just blackout, but somehow was able to have a successful career in enterprise, rent a car for 10 years, and then begin this other business with my ex-wife. And then over the course of another 10 years, build it up from nothing
Zero
to a really huge, big, serious, nice, medium-sized business with multiple locations and many employees and something to be very proud of. But my alcoholism was progressing along the way. And there were certainly too many occasions where I drank way too much and said the wrong thing or did the wrong thing in a public setting, in a work setting. And so I have a lot of regrets about my behavior then, and also that I couldn't have been a better father, that I couldn't have been a better husband, that my mental health symptoms, my depression and anxiety were winning. And I was trying to solve my depression and anxiety problem with booze. Right. And it just it kind of worked in the short term, but it didn't work in the medium and long term, and I became more and more sick and more unwell. At some point in my early 30s, I got a nudge from a judge and had to go to
Nudge from a judge. I love that.
A certain number of meetings in a certain number of days, and did some 12-step then, but held my nose at it because I wasn't really an alcoholic. I was a functioning alcoholic.
Yeah. And isn't that the thing, though? I think that until we have that reckoning within ourselves, right? And I think that that's so much part of where the healing starts, actually, is when we can name it and when we can own it. And so much of that, the denial is what I think keeps people going for so long in directions that are not positive or beneficial, and down paths that because the pain is so much, right? And then this is the only way I know how to cope. And if you take away the way that I know how to cope, then now I'm just going to have pain.
Yes.
So no, thank you.
Yeah.
That is not a me problem. And I can't tell you how many people I've worked with that say exactly the same thing. I can stop if I want to. I only do it in social occasions. Right. All of this denial and all of this bargaining that goes into it, and how long that you were able to do that. I mean, that's a pretty, let's call it a drinking career of
20 years.
25 years.
A long time. But it degraded my quality of life. I wasn't really reckoning with my mental, emotional, physical, spiritual maladies.
Right.
I wasn't as good of a father, as good of a partner as I could have been. Mm-hmm. And this cat just keeps wanting to join us.
Come here.
I know, Mr. Onyx.
This is, well, speaking of drug addicts, I mean, this guy, he's actually on gabapentin right now, and digress. So,
but at some point in my early 30s, I get connected to a sponsor and work the 12 steps and with him. And it's really useful, it's really helpful, but I get a little bit of sobriety, but then I fall away from it, which is a pattern. There's this back and forth, which is why relapse, for anyone out there that's stuck in a struggle of relapse, if you survive, there are things that can be learned. You can do some learning. I also got connected with a mental health professional and really started seeing a therapist for the first time somewhere in my 30s.
As most people do, actually.
As many people do.
That's when it starts happening.
Davis Susskind by name, and he was a medical doctor, a neuropsych, a professor at UCSD, and it was a very costly but excellent and wonderful therapist.
Because real healing costs money. I'm kidding. But it's true, honestly. It really is. It's about investment, and money is just a form of energy exchange.
It's true.
And when you don't pony it up, you just don't get as much out of it. It's the commitment and the follow through and the consistency and the accountability and the expertise too that is so important. So thank you, Dr. Susskind.
But even though I was still active in my addiction when I was seeing him for the years that I saw him, 3 years or so, we were doing a lot of work to help me understand my whys, my attachment injuries, my family of origin stories, how my own anxiety and depression, my symptoms, just all sorts of stuff. So even though I was coming into his office once a week or twice a week at certain times and saying, "Oh, doc, I did it again. I went out and drank," even though I said I wouldn't do it. I went out and drank, and I don't know why I can't get it through my head. Effed up, I did it again. And all this shame and remorse and then talking about it. But so I feel like even though I was not abstinent while I was in his care, I was learning a lot about mental health. At some point, he says, "Reno, if you ever wanted a second career, I think you'd be pretty good as a talk therapist. You're really fascinated by this whole conversation and the dialogue." And so I just filed that away at that time.
So that was the first seed that was ever planted in that.
I think that's right. I think that I've always been a person that loves service, a person that loves supporting other people, a person that's inclined to be a helper. And we can talk about the trauma side of that too, which is
totally
fawn behavior and people pleasing, but maybe that's for
another show
a little bit later on.
Yes.
Which is a fascinating conversation, and you brought to our couple Peter Walker's book on complex post-traumatic stress disorder, which is an incredible book.
Phenomenal book. Love it.
But anyway, so then COVID hits and it all comes to a head. The alcohol use just really goes through the roof. I think this is a common experience for a lot of people. The the regulating
even people
behavior.
who did not drank
A
in
lot.
COVID. That was the thing, right? Yeah. There was so little access to all of the things that we know how to do that are regulating behaviors.
Yeah.
You take away social behaviors, you take away intimate relationships, you take away work, you take away the ability to exercise, right, to just operate your life normally. There's not a lot that's left for people. So that just completely makes sense. So that starts to escalate.
And then my wife and I are having more trouble. My stepdaughter, I think, is now at UC Santa Cruz as a student, and she's having some trouble there. And there was a lot of trouble in our family unit. And ultimately, my business partner and my ex-wife one day come to me at our office in downtown San Diego and say, you're done, you're out of here. And this begins a really difficult and challenging divorce.
So would you say that was the moment when straw that broke the camel's back? Like it was already breaking? Or?
When you look at it backwards,
like
there's so many sad, suffering moments relating to depression, anxiety, alcoholism, and how it affected me and how I showed up in relationship. And so was that the straw that broke the camel's back? No, I think that was the end of that lifetime, for lack of a better word, the end of that life, that family unit, that experience, that I had gotten as far as I could get with what I had at that point. And this is the I don't know if it's the crisis exactly, but it's where I recognize things definitely need to change. And
I think that is the reckoning, though. Yeah. That is the reckoning. Like, because as you say, retrospectively, you can look back on all of these events or things that didn't happen or did happen, or the way that you were feeling, or how things were not gelling, or whatever that is. And you can say, like, this was all part of whatever this breakdown was. But I think like when we're in the middle of it, it's so overwhelming, and we're grasping, like, because change is scary. And so we're grasping at anything that we can, and just like, cat with its claws in the curtain slowly going down. And then finally, when we hit that rock bottom, I think, which is the crisis, shall we say, that is where I love, and this is not my own saying, but that's the breakdown to have the breakthrough.
That's right.
And that gives us that opportunity.
Yes.
And I always like to say too, if we don't preemptively strike, if we don't sting first, meaning if we're not in a place where we feel strong enough, supported enough, seen enough, ready enough.
The context
has to be there, then the universe will do it for us.
That's right.
And I've had that happen to myself too, where the rug has gotten pulled out from underneath me when it was just, there was nothing that was going right and everything was going wrong. And you just are still, but you're thrashing around, right, in the middle of the ocean trying to hold on to something or something to hold on to. And then all of a sudden, boom, you're gone. And in a way, I think as painful as those crisis moments are, I do believe, and from my personal opinion, that is actually divine grace.
Yes.
And that's the intervention of divine grace.
How could we possibly be where we are if we hadn't have gone through what we went through?
Amen.
And how do we contextualize real suffering? And certainly Viktor Frankl talks about it in A Man's Search for Meaning.
The Holocaust survivor.
The Holocaust survivor, and creates logotherapy after essentially how to contextualize incredible, immense suffering. Of course, and there's the idea of post-traumatic growth as well, right? And so breakdown to breakthrough. But and so it wasn't sort of right away, but sort of shortly thereafter, I'd moved back in with my parents as we were working through the divorce, and still drinking. And actually, for the first month after that moment, I was drinking very heavily. I was drinking essentially every night to the point of blackout intoxication, and got behind the wheel one night and had a very near miss. Very near miss. And just my heart went off the road a little bit, came back on the road. And my heart rate went through the roof. No one was injured, no one was around, thank God. And grace, maybe, who knows, but ultimately it's all grace, from my perspective anyway. And that was kind of a real shocking moment. A friend of mine and his wife were hosting a podcast called Recovery Elevator. which was about recovery. They had been alcohol free for at least a year at that point, I think. And so I hopped into this particular context, and because it was still COVID times, and this was the end of 2020, in November of 2020, actually 11/17/2020.
Isn't that funny how we remember the day of the most significant events? Yeah. They really do stick with us.
And just started participating in these meetings, these recovery elevator meetings via Zoom on a daily basis or multiple times a day sometimes. And I was in my parents' house. I wasn't really working because I was sort of separated from my work environment. And also at the same time, really dug into the Waking Up application, which is Sam Harris, who is a known sort of non-dual atheist philosopher, public speaker, internet personality. Has an application that does, I think, what Calm does, but has even more to it. And so then I was on Recovery Elevator doing these meetings. I was playing a lot of pickleball because that's what I was doing. And also on this application, Waking Up. And Waking Up had these just amazing, mind-blowing talks and meditations and direct pointing and all different types of this examination of non-dual philosophy. And I just went right into it because to me it was a very practical and practicable method of recognizing peace, calm, wellness, serenity in the here and now. Ultimately, the only moment that will ever exist, this consensual present moment. And so many men and women have shared over thousands of years the most amazing instructions that are readily available to us. And on the internet, on YouTube, Samaneri Jayasara, who is a non-sectarian Buddhist nun, has a channel called Wisdom of the Masters, and she reads wisdom texts from mystical Christian traditions, from Advaita Vedanta traditions, from Ramana Maharshi, who
one of your favorites,
one of my favorites, deeply, and I apologize for mispronouncing his name. I'm sure I'm getting it wrong, but Ramana Maharshi has a number of writings, but essentially inquiries into the self, and one of my greatest shifts occurred while listening to his writings read by Samaneri Jayasara, actually, on that particular channel.
I find it very interesting that for you it was this trajectory of healing really sounds like it was set in a foundation of faith, that there was already this very strong background and foundation of faith, connection to God. And then from there, in your 30s, which is, again, when everybody goes through their self-inquiry, self-discovery place, for the most part, the deeper dive into, again, the understandings of your family systems, your attachment injuries, motivations for the whys behind the behaviors and the things that we think and why we feel that way, the inner critic, just unpacking a lifetime at that point of just all of the different things that have made you who you are, right? And then comes, right, this huge building moment of things feeling so uncomfortable and so untenable, and all the ways in which you at that point had tried to cope with the world and get by, right? And to do all the things that you thought you were supposed to do for the people thought you were supposed to do them for, and in the way that they wanted that to happen, and how just deeply the more that was happening externally, the more internally the suffering was occurring. And so then how things got out of control until that moment of let's just call it again, a crisis, which then leads to an even deeper sinking hole of even more internal upset and pain, right, that had to be felt and dealt with. I always think of it as the bottom never really bottoms out. We think we're there. We're like, oh, this has got to be the most sadness I've ever felt. I think I'm done now, right? I'm done crying. I'm done being angry. And then like it just, and you're like, oh, a new fresh level of hell. So, and that's what it seems like it got to.
I mean, I lose my family, I lose my business, I lose my home, just like that.
Exactly.
I'm living with my parents at the age of
40 in your 40s, totally.
And
everyone's dream.
And it's just absolutely as bad as it could be. And then,
right. And then there's a moment of, oh shit, I don't want to die.
Right.
And I think that's
I don't want to die.
And those are very empowering moments, because those are the choice moments.
Yes.
Those are the moments of conscious choice of this
or
is
grace.
Not, but also grace maybe provides the opportunity, but then the conscious choice of and I want to be here.
Well, and this is maybe more of a conversation for philosophers, but this notion of causality is an interesting one. And causality, it may seem in this relative reality that I am choosing to lift my arm up and down, but it may also be that the movement of every atom and neutrino up until this point has predicted the movement of my arm, and therefore it seems like I'm choosing to move my arm up and down, but in fact it's just happening because it's just the way the universe is unfolding, and from some more global perspective, this has all already happened, essentially.
Right. Well, that's not even philosophy. That gets into just so many layers of physics as well.
Sure.
But
which is well out of my practice.
Totally. I don't even want to touch that. I don't want to touch that too much. But what I will say is that then there's that idea of free will, and then there's also God's will.
Sure.
And all the different ways in which we. This idea that as above, so below. And so who's really in charge here? It's hard to say, right? But what we do know is that if you don't want to be here anymore, you won't be here anymore. There's so many people that I've known that I just don't want to be here anymore, and then they're not. And then there are people that want to be here, and they try and they fight to be here as long as they possibly can until they can't anymore. And so it's one of those things of that moment of choice, and that's for lack of to go through what I would call a shamanic journey, which is there is this death that occurs, right? There's this idea, Joseph Campbell's idea of the hero's journey, and which I would also call the healer's journey or the shamanic journey, same, that we go out into the world, and then we have the descent. So we go through the descent, and the descent is like the layers of hell. There's this myth of Iona, and Iona is this beautiful goddess, and she gets kidnapped by her sister Ereshkigal, and this is Sumerian mythology. But anyway, so she's her evil sister takes her down to the caves of hell. Anyway, making a long story short, she goes down, she has to be in this terrible place, and then she's able to then come back out. So the ascension, coming back out of that place, as there is a death and then a rebirth, just like the story of Christ. And then from that rebirth, then we have this whole new awakening, awareness, opening to so much more.
And we see death and resurrection everywhere we look in our experience in this consensual reality that we're all sharing all the time.
Right.
And that's the good news ultimately, right? Is that that even though we may pass away, that ultimately there is life after death, right?
Right, and that energy is just continues on.
And ultimately we're not ever separate, right?
Right.
We're not separate from all of experience that we happen to be viewing from this particular vantage point.
Right.
At this time. And then there's all these concepts and stories about experience retrospectively or prospectively, the past or in the future.
Right.
But really, we're just here together in this never-ending present moment.
It comes into the idea that we are meaning-making creatures. So that is something that I find very important as far as the healing journey is concerned.
How do we contextualize the suffering?
Right. And how do we make meaning from it in a way? Because I think
that's satisfying.
For us.
If we are looking at life in a linear perspective, it may be that, at least from the non-dual philosophic perspective, that I think the benefit is I could just keep coming back to what's arising right now, which is ultimately not a whole lot. It is a beautiful day in San Diego, but from the first person perspective, there is what we can see, what we can hear, what we can taste, what we can feel, thought, feeling, emotion, sensation, perception.
And again, the perception part of that, though, is really, again, based off of what's already happened and where we're trying to go. So to bring it back to this idea of these things happened. Why they happened, we don't know. The meaning that we have ascribed to them, right, that we have put on them, is that it's an opportunity for growth.
Certainly.
Right.
And there's an idea in Buddhist philosophy, psychology, about ultimate reality and relative reality. And so relative reality being our own individual hero's journeys, I think, and then the ultimate reality being the entire process, all of the movement, the whole experience. And you're right, absolutely, that we need to make meaning 100%. And for the men and women that I get to talk to who've had some really, really, really difficult, adverse experiences in their lives, and I could get emotional thinking about it, actually, but supporting them and having the conversation about contextualizing whatever did happen is a tremendously beautiful gift, but also essential, right, for their healing. Because the resentment or the anger or the frustration or the experience, their perception that something is wrong on the basis of something that did happen, they have to be able to contextualize that in a way that when it comes up, I think of maybe war fighters that I've gotten to work with, that in the present moment sometimes have things occur that cause them to flash back in an autonomic nervous system type way to an experience that did occur that was actually horrific, and so there's a very real physical manifestation of a past experience in the present, right?
Yes.
And then so there's an automatic part, right, which is the technology of this beautiful, amazing human body, which is hundreds of thousands and millions and billions of years old, depending on what part we're talking about, but is doing its job ultimately, right?
Right.
And our autonomic nervous system is doing its job to recall the awful things that did happen
To
protect us. It's pro-species. It's good for the species. But for the individual that's had the awful experience, they have to figure out how to have that experience in the present moment and then practice regulation ultimately, accept, surrender, relax, and then be in the present moment again. Allow the emotional experience to occur, allow all of that to occur, and then again come down off of the slope.
Exactly.
And
that's definitely the nervous system regulation that's required, right? And it's not about, I think, about avoiding the triggers or the bad dark places. It's more about how we can recover from them.
Yes.
And how fast we can recover from them, when we can make of them, we can not allow them to then ruin our lives or to engage in behaviors around those when they come up that are destructive, such as alcohol or drugs or whatever it is however we overeating, however we process.
Self-medicate.
Or workaholism, whatever
we're
that
trying
is.
to do phenomenally to solve the mental, emotional, physical, spiritual dysregulation.
Exactly.
We're trying to solve the problem out here.
Right.
We're not addressing what's actually going on.
Exactly. So going back to this idea of having your own reckoning, your own awareness, and then going on your very deep, immersive, I would say, spiritual journey, and then I want to.
Then I started working as a trial presentation support person.
Are you going to tell this? I really want you to tell the story about your what was it? When you had what were you even calling it? When you were like, oh my God, essence or something. Like, remember that?
I don't know.
You know what I'm saying?
It all sounds ridiculous in retrospect. But
right, because it is.
It is always ridiculous.
I think that's also part of the
What
healing.
did we learn, right?
Well, that's part of the healing journey too. Is what I wanted to get to is that when you were working in trial support, because I
was making some money, and then I think I was also working on going back to get my master's degree, which I ultimately did in clinical in counseling psychology, which I ended up doing and completing. But so prior to that, I was working in trial presentation support, and I was working with a particular attorney, Ken Sigelman, up in Fresno, and was there for a long trial. Maybe it was about a month. And I was listening. This is now many, many months, maybe 6 months into my journey with the Waking Up app, and doing a lot of meditation and a lot of recovery stuff. I'm still participating in this recovery meetings. I think I'd gone to one of their
Retreats,
retreats.
yeah.
And so I'm just deep in it, just so deep in it. And I'm in a particular park up in Fresno, and I forget the name of the park. It's a beautiful park with a sort of stream running through it, and listening to Ramana Maharshi's discussion of the self. And then over the course of a day or 2 or 3 days, have this, what I can only describe as a sort of a psychedelic type experience without any medicine of any kind, and essentially have a shift of perspective, I think is the best way to describe it. And ultimately, I think of that, and I remember coming back home to you, because we were together at the time, and saying, oh, I got it all figured out. I've reached the top of the mountain,
Yes.
and man, I got it all, the problems are all solved here.
Yes, which I've been there too. That's the thing that's the thing I love about these moments, of whether they're through medicine journeys or meditation retreats, or through these divine interventions or whatever it is, where we have these awareness awakening moments. And then you literally feel like you're so connected to everything and everyone and all of the things. And then you're like,
well, and they say, and this is well understood and well documented from all of these different traditions. I think in the Buddhist tradition, they might call it Satori. And so, and before Satori, there is the mountain. In the midst of Satori, there is no mountain. And then after Satori, of course, there's the mountain again.
Exactly.
And
exactly.
And what does the student do? The student chops wood and carries water. And
Correct.
What does the master do? They chops wood and carry water. And so, did you go anywhere? Well, no, not really. But
you have seen the face of God, and I think that is the difference. I think that is the difference of it, is that once you've been there and it's there, the desire to want to get back to that place is so strong.
Well,
or that there's a longing for it too, which also gets a little convoluted and messy.
Yes, and the seeker is the sought, and
which is also something that has to be reminded of.
Well, which is an ongoing practice ultimately, and but getting to have that shift in perspective, it's always available. And then, but retrospectively, I could say it was grace, all grace. How could it not have been grace?
Right.
We're swimming in a sea of grace, right? This is, and so, and it really did feel like really something important and powerful and significant, and it was. And ultimately, from that point on, getting the master's degree in clinical psychology, continuing this practice of, and actually at the time I would have said, I was more interested in the Advaita Vedanta context, or even maybe Dzogchen, but have done some more studying at our local Buddhist temple, Dharma Bums, which is great. Love Jeff and Maggie there, and really just trying to understand all of these wisdom traditions have something to offer, right? They're all just trying to help us figure out how to human. These are all just like methods. There's the cat again. To how to human well.
Right.
How to succeed at humaning and adulting. And so then, can I communicate that to the men and women that I talk to in addiction recovery? And can I provide them with some tools that are useful to recognize their own suffering, the ongoing internal discursive dialogue, and then shift their attention back to the present moment, which is beautiful and liberating.
I agree. And so with all of this that has happened and all that has occurred, I truly believe that as a healer, one of the greatest gifts that we have is the ability to take our suffering and to use whatever lessons and wisdom we've attained from those experiences, and to be able to share that with others. And in the idea of heal or heal thyself, we look back on everything when I think that we are trying to help is a version of ourselves. And so if you look back at yourself from today, retrospectively, back to the part of you that was in the darkest, most deepest, absolutely just torn apart place, right? The dark night of the soul. From this place today, what kind of advice would you give? What kind of love would you give? What kind of words of wisdom would you give to help support that version of you?
That's a funny question, because I think it goes again to this idea of capital S self, small s self, and how could things have gone any differently? But I guess it would just be enjoy the ride as much as possible, And I think that's my current philosophy. And
Yeah.
maybe that sounds a little Pollyanna-ish, or maybe that
A little
sounds
flippant, honestly.
Maybe it sounds a little flippant.
Because I don't know. Because honestly, if I
hopped
Yeah.
in, if Marty McFly pulls up into the DeLorean
Right.
and I hop in with him and he takes
Right.
me back to Reno at age whatever, and I hop out and say, enjoy the ride,
Right.
then maybe Reno at that time is like,
But also what I think that means is that it almost diminishes in a way that suffering or that level of pain.
perhaps, maybe, but ultimately, the symbol, when you think of this sort of the yin yang symbol, of course it's half dark and half light, and the light requires the dark and vice versa, and the dark is just a different kind of light, and that, again, that sounds flippant, and also that sounds very privileged. Ultimately, I think,
What would be the voice you would? How about this? Let me just ask it this way: What would be the voice you would have wanted to hear?
Well, I think probably Thich Nhat Hanh's voice, and I will not do a terrible impression of Thich Nhat Hanh at this moment.
Please don't, yeah.
Because that would be really awful.
Please don't.
But he's
Yeah.
got such a beautiful, soft voice, and even him saying something like, about the mundane, ultimately doing the dishes is beautiful. There's warm water and soap, and you get your hands in the warm water, and there's a bowl, and then maybe you even imagine that you're bathing a baby Buddha.
That's right. That's one of his things.
And it's just the warm, soft water, and you're there doing the dishes, right? And it's a very present moment awareness-oriented discussion from Brother Thich Nhat Hanh about dishes and dish doing, the mundane, I guess. How it can be beautiful and amazing and enjoyable, ultimately, and satisfying.
So would you say that is then one of your greatest medicines? Because I think that as healers, all of our experiences and all the people that we work with, it does distill down into usually like core theme or message or something that is not exactly prettily with a bow on it or anything like that, but just that the medicine that we're able to provide is the lessons that we have fully integrated, fully learned, and fully embodied, and how we are able to then, that's what we give. So when someone's working with us, that's the medicine that they're able to receive.
Perhaps I don't perceive it as mine to give. We talk about this. Where does the healing arise? Right? And ultimately, I happen to be privileged to be in a context where I can sit across from another brother or sister suffering from addiction in my current job, and hold space for their suffering and to say it's going to be okay. And ultimately, and also, among other things, help them, try to provide them with some tools to improve their own experience. And where does that arise from? Well, it's not mine, certainly.
It's going to be okay for them because it's been okay for you, because it
Yes.
became okay for you. Not because it was okay for you.
Yes.
Because actually it was never okay
Right.
for you, but it became okay for you.
Well-
and I think that is an enormous gift to give somebody,
Yes.
which is like, I've been through a version, not the exact same story, not different faces and names and all the things. The components of the story are different, but the main storyline is the same, and that I've been through this and I've come to the other side of this, and I'm nowhere near from being done, and I'm not perfect and whatever, but I am on solid ground. I'm not in the thick of it. I'm not caught in the rip current. I'm not getting sucked into the whirlpool down to the depths of nothingness. So I'm on the other side, and so because of that, being on the other side, the ability to have the compassion and empathy for the person in that experience, to really meet them where they're at in a way that is truly non-judgmental from a felt and lived experience of that. And then to be able to say to them, it's going to be okay. And again, that is not in a way of dismissing, right? Because so much of when someone tells us that, it's because they have literally nothing else to say, right? And they're at a loss and they don't know what to do and they want to make it better. And so they're like, I want to make it better. but saying it from a way of, this is terrible, this is horrible, you're right, this is actually the worst possible thing for you. And there's a way forward.
Well, and that suffering is universal. And it's almost a human right. It may be a part of the technology of our amazing prefrontal cortex and our reality simulators. It may be that suffering is a byproduct of humaning, right? But as to the Dhamma, as to what's offered by Siddhartha Gautama or any other of the avatars, but how do we recognize suffering ultimately, and then how do we practice transcending suffering? That's not my medicine to offer. It is a medicine that I deeply enjoy and would love to discuss.
It's the transmission of the thing.
Fair, absolutely. So hey, how do we practice not suffering together?
Right. Within our shared humanity.
Yes.
Right.
Well,
and I think that's the other part of where the healing occurs. The shared humanity.
Oh, yes.
And then the ability to say, this is what's, again, whatever, regardless of whatever tools or whatever we're giving people. Right?
And the heart math part, way out of my depth on that, but I also know
the regulating piece.
The co-regulation, for sure. We can use Western psychology, but the other part of that seems to be, so there's something about the conversation, there's something about the witnessing, there's something about the unconditional positive regard.
The space that
There's something
held.
about the space holding, there's something about the heart math that moves something. And so that's another beautiful part of it, right?
Right. Exactly.
Mister.
Well, thank you so much, Reno, for going on this ride with me.
Yes.
I appreciate it.
Yes.
And not just the podcast ride, but also like the ride in life. I love you so much.
Love you.
Thanks for being my total best friend and favorite person. Thank you.
Love you.
Love you too. Thank you so much for watching Unveiled with Dr. Natalie. If you like what you heard on this podcast, please like and subscribe. We will be coming out with more content on a regular basis, and I have lots to share with you. So many more interviews lined up with some very fascinating people with great stories to tell that you're not going to want to miss. Also, if you're interested in working with me, I work remotely all around the world or locally in San Diego. And you can visit my website at www.natalievail.com to learn more. Thanks.